If you are not satisfied with the decision made by the Traffic and Parking Commission, you may appeal the decision by filing for a writ of certiorari with the Davidson County Chancery or Circuit Court. Your appeal must be filed within 60 days of the date of the entry of the Commission's decision. We advise that you seek your own independent legal counsel to ensure that your appeal is filed in a timely manner and that all procedural requirements have been met. At the present time, we do not have a quorum of the meeting, so what we're going to do is ask Mr. Peter Westerholm to step forward. He has what we have as a non-action item, and hopefully we'll achieve a quorum for our action items.
Mr. Chair, note that this particular topic is an additional item, and we're not going to do the effective use of stop control presentation.
Okay.
Another switch. We're just going to let Mr. Westerholm present his
Okay,
study.
great. All right. Please state your name for the record and begin, please.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Peter Westerholm. I appreciate the opportunity to be before you today. Many of you I've spoken with about this project. I've been working with the Nashville area MPO for the last number of months and looking at parking in the Nashville area. This has a heavy focus on the downtown area as well as some neighborhood centers, and then also because of the MPO's regional reach, it tries to identify some mechanisms to use in other areas as well. Today's presentation focuses primarily, though, on the Davidson County area with a heavy emphasis on the downtown parking area. I'm going to try to move pretty quickly through these slides and then leave some opportunity for some questions at the conclusion of the presentation. And I would also just want to remind you that you should have a copy of everything before you of the slide deck. I hope that is useful and informative. And I also wanted to remind you that this is a draft. Nothing in this is being officially adopted nor recommended by the MPO at this time. It is still in draft form, but it is hoped that in the near-term future, this will be finalized. Not everything will necessarily be a part of that, but here's sort of a snapshot of where some things are today. So with that, I'll go ahead and move forward. So I wanted to start off on a lighter note with this slide. So the basic idea, a lot of people in Nashville, I think, and not just in Nashville, have a sort of hope for the best approach to finding a good place to park. I want to move over. Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of these slides really quickly. You all are probably very familiar with a lot of these slides and the facts on these slides. There was about 1,000 on-street meter spaces in the downtown core, another 800 or 900 or so in adjacent core areas. Next slide, please. You see here about 32,000 in that core area. There's another probably 20,000 in the broader area that includes the neighborhood south of Jefferson as well as parts of the Gulch. This map in particular is from the Downtown Partnership, just to show you that there is a supply that's pretty widely distributed of parking in that area. Next slide. So we come down to the basics of parking and where I really want to focus a lot of our time and attention, and this leads into a lot of the recommendations that we're vetting at this point in time. But the expectation and belief that a lot of people hold pertaining to parking is that it should always be free and plentiful everywhere you want to go. But of course, with everything, that market forces apply, and there becomes scarcity of parking places as we try to deal with limited right-of-way and our infrastructure. And so some of the truths you see down there, I've listed that parking is not free, that there are costs that are externalized. You see the words induced demand. Many of you are probably familiar with induced demand from a freeway construction perspective, and it elicits images of the Katy Freeway in Houston with its 20 lanes in each direction type of idea. But studies have come out that say the similar ideas apply to parking as well, in that to the extent to which there is ample parking provided, people are encouraged and tend to drive there with the expectation that parking is there, as opposed to taking other means that would already be available. The reliance that we have on single occupancy vehicles, I want to include in there because the idea that parking is not limited into itself. As you all are familiar, it's tied to many things. Nashville's growing. It's at the intersection of land use and mobility, economic development, and congestion. And so the extent to which we talk about how we utilize our public space and the way private space is used for parking, and to the extent that people are going to be using their cars for every trip is a part of that conversation. Even though there are some competing areas, they are connected. A quick comparison on the parking availability here. I've divided up into 3 different areas: on-street parking, surface lots, and garages. And I put this in there under the categories of safety, price, turnover, and convenience. What this tries to show is that for on-street parking, which is both your metered spots and your non-metered spots, it has sort of the best of everything. And the idea that it's safe, it's easy to get in there, it's convenient, and it's attractive. But it also tends to be the lowest in cost. We'll come back to this in some of the recommendations that we visit later on in the presentation, but in a lot of circumstances, we're looking at trying to price and value and put a place of value on a commodity, something that is the most attractive and most convenient and most desirable generally is not you don't want that one to be the cheapest or in some cases the free one because of its impact on the market incentives. Some recent studies I'll touch on real quickly. The Downtown Mobility Study and Nashville Next, both of these have been done over the last number of years, and they touched on parking. You see the Parking Authority, as many of you may be aware that one would be something that would be a middle term of the Downtown Mobility Study recommendation. It requires a couple of things that might include a change to the Metro Charter, but there are some lower hanging fruits such as the smart metering, the shared use parking, the use of dynamic pricing that can be done through the Traffic and Parking Commission as well as ordinances. So I want to jump into some of the recommendations that we're looking at this point in time, then move into some of the other material. So the first one is the idea is that to have smart meters with sensors that communicate real-time occupancy for both visitors and enforcement. This is really one of the most important things that we've seen in a lot of other cities that are looking at improving their parking dynamics. The ability to communicate that real-time occupancy and open that up to people going to visit. They can pull up an app or look at a computer and find out where is the parking. That creates a tremendous opportunity for them to move in the most efficient way possible. But also helps with enforcement so that enforcement doesn't have to worry about driving around looking for violations on a meter. They might, because of the sensors picking up whether there's a car parked there, they'd be able to go immediately to that spot if necessary. And also, it's been shown to improve with compliance as well. The demand-based pricing you see, that's something that started out of San Francisco a number of years ago. I'm sure many of you have seen some of that. I'll go back just a second. Sorry. That is something that has been shown to have a lot of impacts that are positive. We'll touch that on the slide. Once you expand the hours of operation, parking policy that works shouldn't be limited to just times during the daytime. It's also necessary to have an effective management system at nighttime and weekends as well, including Sundays. Looking at the benefit zones, looking at on the last bullet on that slide is the streetscaping and infrastructure. That is an idea that would come about where you have on-street parking. Many of you are familiar with the parking day that the Downtown Civic Design Center does. The opportunity is to take some of those parklets, do that on a full-time basis, and you could add additional amenities such as a smart kiosk that allows for microtransit, like a microtransit hub service where it could be both a placemaking as well as a wayfinding device. It could also use it to queue up a ride share or a car share or some other form of mobility. There's a lot of opportunities you can do there. Some other recommendations we're looking at are things to incentivize surface lots to accommodate mixed-use housing or other types of developments. Usually these are going to be more in your broader, larger scale areas that you find in more suburban areas or your old kind of strip center areas. Downtown, it won't see many of these by themselves. but it's something that has come about. You may remember the retrofitting suburbia speaker that came to the Nashville Next a number of years ago. It's that idea, but it's usually scalable on the larger parcels as opposed to the smaller ones. Looking at the permit parking regulations and updating, I know there's a lot of questions that come up from time to time about neighborhood permit parking, and looking at trying to figure out what are the best practices for that, how does that interact with nearby areas that might have managed parking, and try to figure out, is there a better way to establish a criteria that's fair and equitable for everyone that serves our purposes as well. Looking at things such as alley access, a number of curb cuts, and things like that to make sure if it is put in place, it's done so for good reason. Park and ride and infrastructure that responds to technology, I think, is a key element. On the next slide, for overcoming concerns, two of the main concerns that come up are the perception, number one, that parking is difficult due to the shortage of available spaces. As we saw in the earlier slide, there's over 50,000 spaces in the downtown vicinity. They're just not always located exactly where people want them to be. So there are policies that you can put in place that increases turnover and availability, but most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, communicating where that availability is, and in my mind, one of the most important things that we can do as a city to create a well-functioning parking system. The other concern that comes up is that parking in downtown is very expensive. We have limited influence on what we can do for the private parking operators. So the focus is, in my mind, going to be on what we can do with that we do manage. And I know that this commission is the one that sets the prices for the public square garage as well as the library, trying to figure out, is there price equity for those? More importantly, I would say, is the issue on the on-street parking. After 6 p.m., parking is essentially free in many different areas around the downtown area. Between free and $20 of a special event pricing, we've essentially encouraged people to drive around looking for that free spot. So having some sort of price equity for those would, I think, give people an opportunity to make the best decision based on what their preferences are. Next slide on the best practices. This comes out of the study at the bottom. This is the evaluation from the San Francisco pilot study that was completed a little under 2 years ago, and now has been adopted by a number of other cities. So when you have demand-based pricing that is done well, you see a lot of these different themes pop up where you have an hourly rate that actually decreases across the board when you take them on average. Certain parts will certainly increase, other parts will decrease based on what the demand is. But it is successful in increasing the availability, reducing the amount of time it takes for someone to find a space. And you see there at the bottom, the actual revenues went up. So even though the per hour cost on average has dropped, the revenues gained from the city, they can go back in to fund the operations for that area. Those tend to increase. That's due to more compliance. That's due to the ease of payment. So it certainly helps. Just looking at a quick snapshot of some peer cities, Nashville is not on the slide, but thinking through, our metered spaces were somewhere between Charlotte and Atlanta. Our hourly charges are pretty much in line. The last hour, I would argue that we should probably push that later, especially with as active as our downtown is, closer probably to something like Austin has. Looking at technology features, we are a little bit behind the curve on that. We have a couple areas where you can pay by credit card for the meters and for the pay stations, but that is limited. We are in the process of getting some new meters coming through this year. Many of you are familiar with that RFP and have been a part of that entire conversation. And I think that this shows one, that we're coming from a little bit behind, but we're on the verge of being in a place where we can really move ahead of some of our peer areas if we're able to really get the most bang for the buck. And by that, I'm really thinking about what sensors could provide. I think that sensors provide that real-time availability, which is critical in having a solid benchmark for managing future traffic and parking data. The technology that's out there, if you look at this slide, on the top right, that sort of grid system, that's a heat map put out by the city of Austin. I wanted that one to be in color because it shows you what the availability is per block face. So if you're driving there, you can look at an app, you can look online before. Don't look at the app while you're driving though, of course. But you can tell from based on where you want to go, what the availability is in real time. So if you are going to a concert on this intersection and you park 2 blocks away, you know that you're just going to be very likely you can find a place to spot. The one immediately below that is out of California. It's in the Santa Monica area. What this is, and I know it's a little bit hard to see, it shows you in real time what the pricing is for each of these different lots. And it also has the availability. So the highlight there is there's this garage, here's the cost, and it says there it's 23% full. So you're looking at occupancy and pricing in real time. To the left of that is a garage. That's something that uses a basic loop system technology. It just has the number of spaces available per floor. There's a number of private garages that use that right now, hospitals, and a couple of other ones. The airport uses this as well. You may have seen it out there. It's a very good technology, but the next level up is the picture above that, which actually helps you find your exact spot. It shows you in real time whether or not there's a space there. So if you're driving, you think you see a spot, but it's just a mini parked behind an SUV, you know that before you take the time to drive down that aisle. And then just that other picture there shows that there's technology that can look at an image. This one is actually from downtown Nashville at 5th and Church. It's no longer a surface lot, but rather a big hole at this point where the MDHA garage is going to be going. But that was a test example of how you can use a camera to take snapshots and figure out what the occupancy is, as well as the time that each of those cars has been in that spot. I just want to close with a couple of things looking at technology and mobility. 5 years ago, no one looked at Uber and Lyft. Those were really not on the radar. Just as 10 years ago, smartphones were not on the radar. I think in 5 years and 10 years, you hear a lot about autonomous vehicles. I'm not here to make a prediction on when those are going to actually be on the street, but I do think that we need to start thinking about things like that and think about where the market share of ride sharing and things of that sort are going to come into place. What will those ultimately be, and how do we craft our policies as a city to try to make sure that we are allowing those to reach the maturity they need to reach for their operational and optimization, but also figure out how do we design our infrastructure to be as responsive to these changes as we can. And so with that, I probably went a few minutes over. I apologize, but I'm happy to take any questions that you all may have.
Thanks. I just wanted to thank Peter Westerholm and MPO for your presentation and this in-depth study. I was just curious, so how would we get a copy of the report then? Will it eventually be available on the MPO's website, I guess?
I believe it will be. We are in the process of trying to wrap up some things. I can't give you a definite timeline, but it is expected that in the near future, everything will be finalized and will be made available through the website.
Great. Well, I know we're missing some commissioners today, so that'll be helpful, and we look forward to that. Thank you.
Brenda, do you have any questions you'd like to? Chip, I have a question. Last month, we discussed you're evaluating all the traffic light synchronization in Nashville. It would appear on this to do some of these parking meters would need to have some type of technology if you were to implement this to do demand pricing, et cetera. What's the status of the parking meters and what would be involved in implementing that particular recommendation?
Similar to the signal project we have going, we have a parking project, if you will, to get a better handle on our inventory, first of all. Get a database. We've got a database. We're going to update our database, work with the MPO on all the smart technology things, and then we have, again, a consultant that's putting together a game plan of what next. We got credit card accepting meters on the horizon very soon, but you just don't go throw them out there without having a game plan. We've got some meters that are giving us some problems, if you want to know the truth, so we got to get those replaced, but there's still got to be a game plan for that too. So right now, Diane and our consulting firm with the MPO are working on, like you like to say, looking at it from a higher picture and getting a better grasp of what we're dealing with, and then we're gonna go smart with our parking. I don't know exactly what that means just yet. It might not be pucks in the road yet, but these meters that we're about to put out will have an infrared sensor that'll tell you if the spot is occupied, and that'll transmit to some office somewhere where somebody can maybe put that in an app. That's what we'll all work together on.
Peter, have you all identified other areas in town where, say, there's not parking meters, that there should be more parking meters, or is that something that Public Works staff is doing?
Yeah, I would say yes to both. Public Works staff does look at other areas. It's, I don't want to speak for them, but I believe that theirs is usually by request.
Yeah, that's actually it comes before this body for approval or for review, but it's a lot of times it's through all of us in here that'll call and say, man, we don't have any turnover parking out here, or a business will go in and say, we need some turnover parking here. So it's a very dynamic operation, but to say we have a very comprehensive plan that goes out and looks at a street and forces meters on, because we want to have a reason, because it doesn't necessarily get accepted very well some places, but we're looking at like the 12th South area. We're looking at that area for some kind of parking meter plan. You got residential mixing with commercial, so it's very delicate. But this kind of plan would help us determine where that's a good idea and where it's not. But 12th South, the Belmont area, another good area where there's mixture, but do you put meters in front of somebody's house? It's delicate.
Commissioner, to follow up on that question, there are a number of areas that Mr. Knopf has mentioned that have been looking at trying to figure out if it was decided that this was an appropriate place where metered parking would have a positive impact on the area. I've been looking at some areas, 5 Points, 12 South, Hillsborough Village, places in some cases where there's a little bit of metered parking, but in most cases probably not that much. One of the opportunities that's out there is that if the meters are put in place, one of the big questions would be, and this goes to a little bit of a metro legal question, the best practice that has been identified across the country is where you have essentially revenue districts, where excess revenue generated from those areas goes back into that area, that immediate vicinity, for streetscaping, for beautification, for a number of different things. And I believe that it would, from my preliminary conversations, the way that the Metro Charter describes parking revenue, it goes into the general fund to cover the cost, but does not allow for things like beautification. So within that restraint, there are some things we could look at determining depending on how much we want to pursue that. But there are a number of areas that I think would at some point be good candidates for managed parking, provided you have the support from the businesses and the residents. That's what makes it a little bit tricky, is that in most situations, the businesses and the residents are usually willing to accept paying for parking if they see an immediate return that goes back into that neighborhood. So trying to figure out a way to make that work will be something that we'll have to spend some time thinking through. But again, it comes back to the idea that there's a lot of revenue that is potentially out there that could both help Public Works from a perspective of helping to pay for sidewalks or other things that would go back into doing things that are mostly under the purview of, to an extent, traffic and parking, but certainly under Public Works and as well.
Are there any other comments from other commissioners? I thank you for this presentation. It was very enlightening. Thank you very, very much, and we look forward to maybe having you come back.
Sure, I'd be happy to come back. When everything is finalized, I'll be happy to come back for the commission again and let you all know when that is. And I'll be happy to keep everyone here apprised of that schedule. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it appears that we do not have a quorum to transact business.
Does that mean that even the agendas and that sort of thing, not that there's any point in approving the agenda, but do you still just stop cold, Terry? Or?
The commission, I'm sorry. The commission can't really take any action that involves voting. It does say 5 members of the commission shall constitute a quorum. A quorum shall be required to conduct official business. Only 4 members are required to hold public hearings, read communications, or hear committee reports. So what we just did was totally appropriate, but if every other matter really requires a vote, then we can't conduct it with just 4 members.
With that
Yeah.
said, I know there are some people here for the mandatory referrals, items 1, 2, and 3. Those items, from what I understand, still proceed without, we don't have to take action on those items for those still to proceed through the council, correct?
Well, they're
Different type,
referred
but-
to this commission mandatorily by the charter, and then if the commission doesn't take action within 30 days, they're deemed to be approved.
Okay, so that would relate to proposal number 2016M 003AB, 005AB, and 006AB. Is that correct?
That is correct.
The other items on the consent agenda would be deferred until a meeting with a quorum. Is that correct? Ms.
I'm
Legal
not-
Counsel? Yes, okay.
I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, all right. Before we adjourn, since we don't have a quorum, it's my understanding, a little bit of sad news. Unfortunately, Mr. Macy, who we hold near and dear, has recently lost his parents, so we extend our condolences to you. And also, just like to commend you for your work with the recent snow ice event. Thank you for the diligence of the public works staff. Appreciate that very, very much. With that said, Ms. Police Officer?
Motion to adjourn.
I guess we can approve that.
Yes, that's the only motion that a commission can make when there's not a quorum.
Okay, we will approve. Thank you.